Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to share with you Ark's top 10 most underrated tames. In at number 10 is the Angler. Now this thing was released way back, and I do definitely fondly remember this thing from Squid's old Ark series, and his last episode on the Bongoman's Island map was taming the anglerfish, and still to this day this is actually a pretty useful creature for some certain specific Ark tasks, especially with their silica pearl gathering abilities, and that is pretty much all they have going for them. But silica pearls, if you didn't know already, are an extremely useful Ark resource, so that is why they are an extremely useful Ark creature which many people don't talk or even tame at all, and they just don't question it as a creature. They'll always go for something else. And yes, there are better sea creatures out there, but the Angler is great earlier on to mid-game stages in Ark, where you can't fully shell out for the most powerful ocean tames, but you still want to farm all of those silica pearls to get your fabrication up to the max. These creatures are really worth the tame at some point, as they aren't difficult at all, and they are extremely useful for gathering up all of those silica pearls. In at number 9 is the Chalik ethereum. Now you may think this creature is just utterly useless, or you may think this creature is an absolutely insane tame and 100% worth it. And I'm kind of leaning more onto that side, as this creature does have a lot of abilities which many other creatures don't have. And also, the Chalik ethereum has an absolutely insane knockback attack, and it is just a generally good creature for just dealing a lot of damage. It's a bit like a slightly worse Megatherium, which really does pack a punch, and it actually is a very decent travel mount as well. It has a very respectable speed stat, one of what you will not complain with at all, and it does have a wealth of other abilities as well, like it being able to throw literal rocks of, I think, even feces at the enemy player. But this ability will take some time to actually practice and get right, as it is a somewhat difficult ability to control, but when done right, it is a really fun, cool ability which does have many uses as well, as it essentially makes this thing a long-range fighting dinosaur, which many other Ark creatures simply do not have. The only one I can really think of off of hand is the Velonosaur's turret ability. In at number 8 is the Carnotaurus. Now I know this will be a somewhat unpopular opinion among many of you, but in my opinion, my personal opinion, I really do enjoy the Carnotaurus in the early stages of my Ark playing. In those early stages, it is extremely useful to get yourself a creature that can grind all of that oil and those silica pearls and all of those underwater resources. Yes, I will definitely agree this isn't the best creature out there to gather all of those berries and just harvest general things, as I'm pretty sure this thing can't even gather berries, but if it can, it is still an extremely slow Ark creature, which isn't great on land at all. But when it comes into the water, the Carnotaurus does actually have some reasonable speed. And yes, just for reference, this B-roll does have some boosted speed on the Carnotaurus, as I think it just looks really funny. And it definitely is really funny in my opinion. Comment down below if you think a really fast Carnotaurus waggling its little legs really quickly is funny. You know, some people do, and I'm definitely one of those people. But yes, as you can see here in the B-roll, this is me going to gather some oil from the kind of depths of the ocean. Not obviously right to the bottom, as that wouldn't be great, as your player would simply run out of oxygen. As the time when you're getting the Carnotaurus, you will not have the scuba tank. I'm pretty confident you won't. So yeah, you can always go into those lakes and lower lying rivers, and there you'll find some oil and definitely some silica pearls, and that is where I think the Carnotaurus really shines the most. In at number 7 is the Beelzebufo. Now I know loads of people on my channel really do not feel as if the Beelzebufo is underrated, and they extremely love this creature, and they think it is one of the most popular Ark creatures. And among quite a lot of Ark players, the Beelzebufo is definitely very popular for its cementing paste gathering abilities. But the fact is, a lot of Ark players as well simply discount the Beelzebufo, and I was one of them before I tried it, as they will just simply say beaver dams are the most efficient way to gather cementing cementing paste, and there isn't a point of spending all of that time to get yourself one of these absolutely amazing, charming Ark frogs, which now obviously I have turned my opinion over is simply not the case. In insect caves like the one on the island, the Beelzebufo really does shine, and you can gather thousands and thousands of cementing paste. And with Ark being a buggy game as well, sometimes beaver dams don't even spawn and can be an absolute nuisance to find, so knowing that you can literally just find some insects on a Beelzebufo to get that cementing paste is actually extremely useful as well, where you just can't find beaver dams and you just can't find that cementing paste. The Beelzebufo is definitely the best creature out there for reliable, quick cementing paste gathering. In at number 6 is the Castoroides. Now again, you may be kind of on the edge like the Beelzebufo with this creature, as you may either love it or hate it. These creatures do seem to be quite Marmite creatures, as you may just not see the use in taming a Castoroides. But before you have the chainsaw in Ark, the Castoroides is one of the best creatures for gathering wood. And you all know wood is a resource which you will need a lot of throughout the game, right from the beginning all the way to the end stages of the Ark game. You will need all of that wood. The amount of wood that you will need in one Ark map playthrough is absolutely insane, and the beaver will really help you to actually get you there. And also the beaver is an extremely fast creature as well, and great in the water too, so it is a sort of upgrade to the carb enemies if you still can't get a creature that is underwater capable that actually spawns in the water, like the Megalodon or Ichthyosaurus or Plesiosaurus or Mosasaurus, which you may not have at the stage when you'll be taming these things. And also on top of that, they have an extra little special spicy ability as well, which makes them really nice to use. The fact is, their saddle is just a really nice portable smithy, extremely useful. In at number 5 is the Spinosaurus, and what a creature this is, and also in my opinion, what an underrated carnivore, as the Rex always seems to take the spotlight away from the Spinosaurus. And in my opinion, the Spinosaurus is pretty much what a Rex is, and in some cases it can be easier to tame, as it does spawn in less hostile environments, and it definitely has a lot of really great uses that the Rex simply can't partake in. Firstly, it has a really amazing turning circle, which the Rex simply can't compete with, as it can turn 360 on the spot, whereas the Rex's turning circle is absolutely atrocious, and in many situations it is so bad you can even get your Rex killed because it can't turn around and attack the creature that is attacking by its feet. Also, the Spinosaurus is great in the water too, and I'm pretty sure it does have an oxygen stat, even though it may not as well. I'm kind of a bit in between. It may have had one in the past and now it doesn't. Either way, its oxygen stat is really great, and it is a great underwater creature with creatures like the Baryonyx, the Mosasaurus, the Plesiosaurus, the Basilosaurus. The list literally goes on for underwater creatures, and unlike most underwater creatures and pretty much every creature apart from this and the Shadowmane, it has the hydration buff, so it will do even more damage when in water, which is just simply great, as with any carnivore you always like to have a buff. Sadly, it does not have the bleed ability, but still, that hydration buff is absolutely OP, and when it goes back onto its hind legs, this thing will do even more damage on top of that. It is definitely a great boss creature, and actually overall, I'm pretty sure it does more damage than the Rex, as it can attack faster, and I think its damage stat is higher. Its only real downside is its health is slightly worse than something like a Rex. In at number 4 is the Baryonyx. Now, this creature is definitely one of my favorites, and one creature that I will never forget in my Ark journey, and I'm surprised that so many other people don't talk about this to the extent that I do. And yes, it is not the most underrated creature out there, but I definitely think every single Ark player should have a Baryonyx in their roster of creatures, and they should know how to tame one effectively, efficiently, and know how to use one effectively as well. Yes, Shadowmanes are really great for caves now, but still the Baryonyx is my go-to 100%, as obviously its size means that this thing can fit into pretty much any cave. and compared to the Shadowmane, I'm just more used to using the Baryonyx, and yes, it may not be quite as versatile in terms of travel. In my opinion, this thing is still extremely useful and deserves a use, even though in some cases it is somewhat overtaken by the Shadowmane. Except the Shadowmane doesn't have the secret little ability that the Baryonyx has hidden up its sleeve. When it's in the water, it can literally stun creatures if you press C. And yes, the Shadowmane may have the hydration buff and things like that. The Shadowmane is a really great creature, don't get me wrong. It's just for things like caving and underwater exploration, I will always go Baryonyx before Shadowmane. And I would urge you to do that too. And also, they are a lot more accessible than the Shadowmane, as they do spawn on the island. Yes, I know the Shadowmane can be found on Fjorda, at least I'm pretty sure it can be found on Fjorda. So it is free to every Ark player out there, apart from Switch, I think doesn't have Fjorda yet, and obviously mobile doesn't. But on spawning on the island, it really does mean that this creature is the most accessible that it can be. Definitely worth the tame. In at number 3 is the Allosaurus. Yet again, another carnivore, which some people again may say they use all the time. But I really think the Allosaurus does not get the press that it really deserves, like the Spinosaurus and the Bary, as the Allo is by far one of the best boss creatures in Ark in general. And yes, the Rex may have more health, but the Allosaurus does an extremely immense amount of damage in packs, and it is just by far one of the most useful combat creatures in Ark. And with its pack buff, which obviously it will get from being in a pack, it can be buffed even more than a Rex can. And if you combine that with UT buffs on top of that, and the Daeodon healing everything, you can have yourself a really great boss environment with Allos. And if you do breeding and mutations, you can have yourself an absolutely insane pack of Allos. And they don't tend to be as absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid as a Rex. These things will pretty much never get stuck on anything in the Ark terrain. And also, if you're doing the Overseer on the island, I would probably recommend bringing Allos, as getting through the tech cave with Rexes, just those Rexes, man, they will just get stuck in the lava and they will just die, and they'll just fall in the most stupid places, and it is really infuriating trying to retrieve them. So I will always use something like the Allo or the Spino if I'm feeling like it for the Overseer boss on the island. And I've only used Rexes once, and I completely regret it, as pretty much all of my army was killed in the tech cave, as all of the Rexes just decided, I don't want to live anymore, and I'm just going to jump straight into that lava. But obviously the Allo does not have any of those issues, and unlike the Rex, it has the all famous bleed ability. Definitely a carnivore to be proud and worth taming. In at number 2 is the Mantis. Now again, this is one of Ark's most accessible creatures, with this thing spawning on maps like Ragnarok. And yes, albeit it may not have the easiest taming method out there, requiring you to passive feed it woolly rhino horns on Ragnarok, or you can use Deathworm horns as well, and you will have to use Deathworm horns on the original map that it came on, which is Scorched Earth. And I get that many people do recognize the Mantis out there, but like the others, I really think everyone should have a Mantis in their roster, as some people may think it's just weak, useless, not worth it. Why even bother with all the prep and all of that just effort to get yourself some really good Mantises? And to that, I would say they are extremely great harvesters, and on a map like Ragnarok, these are by far the go-to creature for gathering all of that mutton up. And they're definitely really fun harvesters to use as well. And pretty much any melee weapon that you can think of, apart from tech melee weapons, I'm pretty sure, these things will be able to wield and use to such a high level of ability. The only real downside to using a Mantis with your tools is the durability factor to it. But if you have Ascendant tools, then you'll have a really great time, as those weapons are not going to break as often. The Mantis is definitely a tame every Ark player should have in their roster, and one every Ark player should tame, and in my opinion, it doesn't get the support that it actually really needs. And finally, in at number 1 is the Carnotaurus. Now, many people wouldn't have expected this thing to be in the number 1 slot, but in my opinion, the Carno is my favourite carnivore in Ark. Yes, I prefer it even above the Baryonyx. The amount of nostalgia I have with this creature and the amount of success I've had with this creature is absolutely insane. And when I did Genesis 1 for the first time, I beat the Master Controller, albeit on Gamma, with the Carnotauruses, and it went extremely well, and it was an extremely fun and useful boss fight for me to have. The Carnotauruses are actually a very viable boss creature, albeit they won't do what a Rex, a Spino, or an Allo can. They are still a really good middleman for doing those Gamma boss fights, and you can definitely push for Beta and Alpha depending on what the fight is, just maybe not with the Master Controller. And did you also know that Carnotaurus, translated from Latin into English, means meatball, which is why I always call my Carnotauruses meatball, partly because it sounds funny, but also it is just accurate to what Carnotaurus actually means. Also, since the Carnotaurus' release, this thing has been TLC'd, now having a second attack where it will headbutt the enemy creature and deal that all-famous bleed ability, which only one other creature on this list so far, being the Allosaurus, actually has. And again, this is something that something like the Spino or the Rex doesn't have, which is why it is extremely useful to have yourself a Carnotaurus, and as always, call this thing Carny Dave. The top 10 best beginner Ark Tames, and that means just if you're new to the game, not if you're early on. In at number 10, I've decided to put the Carnotaurus, as I find this is really an effective and useful creature to have in your roster. It is just so nice and very easy to tame. Yes, you could say the Allo is a great one as well, and I'll give it here as a spot on here, sorry, as an honorable mention. But I find the Carno is just the better creature for me, but I'll let you decide that for yourself. What is the better creature for you in terms of ease of taming and just the overall size of the creature and mobility and damage and health, and all of those factors really do play in. And for me, the Carno is always the creature which I'll go for. Feel free to disagree in the comments down below. I do not mind if your opinion is different to mine. But for me, again, the Carno is just the one for me. Compared to the Allo, I vastly prefer the smaller size, and I like just having a smaller carnivore. I also find they are easier to tame as well, just by a little bit, because trapping them is easier, considering the Allo usually does spawn in a pack. Although in ASA that's less apparent because baby versions of the creatures can spawn, and it's pretty much the same in terms of difficulty. The only real difference is the Carno is still slightly easier, as killing a Carno is a little bit easier than killing an Allo, especially if there's some others about as well. But you know, there might be some other Carnos about in this instance too. The Carno also does the bleed ability, and I like the amount of mobility it has. I can feel reasonably stealthy and quite good with myself while traveling around and demolishing loads of creatures around me with this thing, and that is why I really like it as a beginner Ark Tame. Next up, we've got the UT, and although you might not be thinking about bosses quite yet, I find this is a really nice one if you are new to the game, as yes, maybe a Rex is something which you go for, and a Rex is something which you definitely can, but I find the UT in most places is generally just a better carnivore to use around the map. The Spino is a great option as well, but I find the UT is the easiest option to tame out of those three, and you still got that courage roar and the fear roar, tons of mobility and a lot of damage dealing. They are just really great carnivores to run around the map with and use all across Ark. They are very sufficient for all of your big carnivore needs. Their stamina is good, their health is good, their weight is good, their damage is good, and obviously they've got those abilities as well. So, you know, they're even nicer to use, and they're better at swimming than the Rex. I know you're probably not going to be using these things as underwater carnivore, but I find they really are not the worst for that job, and if you need to cross some sections of water, you won't find it too difficult to do that with the UT. Next up, we've got the Stego. You can either really choose between this, the Trike, and maybe the Parasaur, possibly a Diplo or a Bronto as well, although this is my preferable one. Also, sorry about all the flickering in this B-roll. I should probably re-record it when ASA sort of fixes itself up a little bit, because yeah, it wasn't doing the best when I was recording this, and shadow flickering was very commonplace in the game. It still really is on the island. Not really on Scorch, because there's a lot less trees about and generally a lot less shadows about, or maybe the issue's just fixed really on that map. The Stego obviously has gone through some TLC for release, and since it's been released, in the early stages of the game, and it makes it even better because if you're a PvP Ark player, then even if you're new to the game, you could possibly do some lower level raiding with one of these creatures. You can get into the high end ones as well, but turret soaking with this thing on maybe a kind of mid-tier base is going to be something which you can do solo with one of these creatures, obviously by using the, I think hardened plate is the one for turret soaking. The heavy plate is good for gathering wood, and the sharpened plate will gather you all your berries and things like that, which is what I would use it for from a PvE perspective, and obviously that's what I mainly use it for as a PvE player. Then at number 7, I've decided to put the Pteranodon, as well, yes, they're going to be really great views to begin a tame. I find there's some better ones out there. You may have put this higher, and that is totally acceptable, but this really, for me, deserves to be in the number 7 spot. No higher or no lower. It is a very easy fly to tame. Probably the easiest kind of really good traveling mount out there to tame, just apart from one creature which has actually made it right the way into the number 1 spot because I find it better, and it's even easier to tame than this thing. The only real difficulty is the map that it spawns on, but still, as a beginner Ark player, you might have access to those maps and might not, and you can differ this list depending on what maps you have. But I am contributing all maps into this, but mainly kind of focusing on maps like the island and those free DLCs, because, you know, in theory, most people are just going to have a lot more playtime on those, and they're going to be playing those first, or just generally playing those because they don't have the other maps. Then a real difficulty for this is the saddle. The chitin or keratin can be a little bit difficult to get. I find go with chitin, it tends to be easier. Just kill any kind of insects that you can find around, the small ones like the Titanomira and the Meganeura, and you'll have a good time with getting that chitin. You can obviously get it through keratin as well from the carbonaries, which are the turtles you'll find on the beaches, but go through insects because you'll get it done a lot faster, and obviously they take a lot less time to kill. I wasn't really quite that knowledgeable back in like 2015, 2016, but at least I do know that now. Obviously the Pteranodon is very easy to tame. Bowler it, and you'd use a club or some tranks. Club if it's a low level, tranks if it is a higher one, and then saddle it up and you get yourself a fast, agile flyer which can be used for both PvE and PvP scenarios. The Thyla maybe you wouldn't think of as a beginner tame, but trust me, if you take your precautions properly, you can get this creature tamed properly, well and efficiently. If you have yourself access to the Thyla saddle, which I think is in the level 40 or 50 range as far as I'm concerned, you can obviously check that as well. Then this creature is really going to be just great for you to have, as the trap can be very simply made with some wood and then simply trank it out when it's in the trap. Obviously look for one on the rubber trees. You'll probably want yourself a Pteranodon as well, or just a flyer to get around. You can do it on foot with some other creatures, but I find a Pteranodon is quite an easy and effective creature to use to tame on. Then once you've got it into said trap, then trank it out. Obviously make sure you've got some armor on too, at least chitin really, because you don't want to be killing yourself in a scenario like this. Put some sleeping bags down if you're not sure if you will survive, because they're going to come in real handy, so you don't have to go back all the way to your base, and you might not have another Pteranodon lying around, so it's going to be a long while until you get back to the redwoods, and that Pteranodon might die as well because you can't get back to it in time. But then once you've tamed one, you've got yourself one of the best, if not the best creature really on the island, just for everything in general. Obviously it's no berry gatherer, but it still can deal the bleed ability, and it can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface. It is extremely mobile and generally an all-round great caving and carnivore to have in your roster. It is an amazing creature, and I really do like people that use a creature like this, and I like using a creature like this. It really is a good one, which actually, if you prepare for it, beginners can actually do it with relative ease. In number 5, we have got ourselves the Baryonyx, and this is going to be the best caving creature out there for you. Yes, I said the Thyla was good. The Saber can also do some stuff as well, but the Barry is really going to be the one you're going to look out for when it comes to caving.
Again, you might not be thinking about that yet, but trust me, get one of these things, they'll be great for caving. They have the health, stamina and agility to get through those things, and on top of that as well, they are the right size to fit into all of them, really, apart from the artifact of the Skylord Cave. Don't even try bringing any creature into that, you're gonna have to do that one on foot. They also just are great creatures for general mobility around the map as well. They can get a lot done when it comes to travel, not quite as much as the Thyla, but they can jump around and they are really good swimmers, which the Thyla really can't justify. Also, I do find they're a little bit easier to tame too. Their special ability while underwater is the fact that they can do a spin attack, stunning creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, and that makes them really good for the underwater caves as well, which again, you may not be thinking about. Don't know why I said it twice, but either way, yeah, you might not be thinking about that yet, but trust me, that time will come at some point, and it's just better to prepare first, and you can still use these things for a great traveling mount and combat creature. Next up, I've decided to put the Crystal Wyverns on the list, and yes, the Wyvern does deserve some attention and a lot of respect, but if you do have Crystal Isles, which is a free DLC, obviously Raasclark is as well, so you can have access to the Wyverns for free, then hop on Crystal Isles and get yourself some Crystal Wyverns. You do need to be level 60, so get yourself a note run done. If you don't know how to do that, look up, there'll be some simple tutorials online for note runs that you can do on Crystal Isles. Trust me, it'll be easy, you'll have no issues doing that whatsoever. Then get yourself some Trank Arrows and probably a sufficient trap to trap one of these Wyverns, then obviously you're going to knock it out and get that primal crystal. Then find a Crystal Wyvern, which you'll find to be the most desirable for you. For my preference, it is Blood Crystal Wyverns, but you might like the Emerald Crystal Wyverns or the Tropical Crystal Wyverns more. Just pick whichever one is most appealing to you. Then there's a specific spot you can go on its back, kind of where you would ride it and get onto that spot of it, and then, you know, just press E and it's going to start passive taming, and you can just stay on that spot, and then every time it tells you to feed it, keep pressing E, and then eventually you'll tame this thing. Make sure you have enough primal crystal though, because that can be a little bit of a difficulty. Always use the app Dodo Dex if you're unsure of what you're going to need for taming. It's not going to be the most accurate thing in the world, but it will give you quite a good assumption for what you can expect. So overestimate that a little bit and then you should be fine. But yes, they're the Wyverns, but just so much easier to tame, and I find their elemental abilities are even better, and they're not really difficult to tame. In number 3, I've decided to put the Daeodon. Again, you might not think of this as a tame that you can get quite early on as a beginner, but still, these things are really easy. Go onto Valguero if you haven't already and get some of these things spawn in the Chalk Cliffs biome. I'm not actually sure what spawn point it is, but you know, it's the biome that looks like this. I'm pretty sure it's quite central. It's sort of near the big lake that's in the middle of the map. Then you're going to want to find yourself some Daeodon nests. Kind of make sure you have a grappling hook, or actually you can just kamikaze, go in and then try and run out, and then wherever you die, then just pick up your body from there and get out and go to your base. Then just put some torches around this egg and raise this thing, and then obviously have sufficient meat at the time to bring this thing up. They really aren't very difficult. You don't have to worry about imprint and all of that yet. They're not going to be used for boss fighting when you're first getting them. Once you've got that saddle though, you can really use these things as great carnivores to travel around the map with, and once you've got a nice breeding pair, you don't have to worry about taming them this way anymore. And then obviously you can worry about imprints and all of that when you start getting these creatures ready for doing your boss fights, as they'll have a better chance if obviously they've been fully imprinted, and it's just going to help their stats all round. They also take no fall damage, which is just great for their traveling, and like the Thyla, they can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface. They really are good tames for traveling, and I love them for this use. And considering how easy they are to tame, for all you beginners out there, really go on Valguero and tame one of these things, because you will definitely not regret it. And you can always just transfer it onto whatever map maybe you're trying on a little bit more, because Valguero might not be your main map at your time. In number 2, I've decided to put the Argentavis, as I find this is just generally a really great creature all round. It has a variety of abilities, and generally it is one which you can find abundantly across the island's mountains, and it is just going to be a go-to. You may not consider it as a beginner tame again for the saddle level, which I think is 61, something around that, but trust me, with note runners you can get there pretty quickly, and you can still be a beginner to the game and get into the level 60s. Then once you've got one, which can be done with a very simple trap, I advise you to trap, and then you lure it in, and then you obviously close the trap off. Trank this thing out, you can just use a crossbow. You don't really need to worry about the long necks for even things like that. You don't really need to worry about the long neck for most things, where you can still use trank arrows right to the late stage of the game, but you know, it's advisable, and you can even get into shocking tranks too, but trank arrows will do just fine for a tame like this. And then you've got weight reduction, things like metal, crystal, and obsidian. They can carry all kinds of creatures, as well as that their smithy axe as saddle, making them really great for traveling to places where you're going caving. Just carry your Baryonyx in the claws of the RG, take it to wherever you need to go for whatever cave you're doing, and then when you get out, if those arthropods have damaged any of your armor, then you can simply just repair it in the RG. Also, if your RG is low in health, you can always eat something, and not in your inventory explicitly, but just eat a dead creature, or just kill a creature and eat it once it's dead, and then you're going to get yourself a nice regen buff, and it will definitely come in handy. And at number 1, I'm deciding to put the Maewing, as I find, considering its saddle is unlocked at level 18, it is absolutely insane how good this is as a glider. And yes, you may not have Gen 2 at your disposal, and that is perfectly okay. You can always moderate the list and get something like the RG or the Crystal Wyvern or the Daeodon for all of those needs, but I just find they are just so good at gliding, I do have to warrant putting them in at the number 1 spot. They're the best travel mounts in the game in my opinion, and they're so easy to tame. A few signposts, you just trap them in a position, and then boom, like that, just give them a couple of trank arrows. The saddle again is unlocked at level 18 really early on, and you can have yourself this amazing creature, which is, in my opinion, again, the best gliding creature in the game. They also are really good swimmers as well, which you might not expect out of these things, but when you could kind of think of them as a platypus, it sort of makes sense. They also do act as a portable breeding trough as well, so maybe if your Deinonychus needs feeding early on, you can get yourself that Maewing to feed it. Obviously you can just put meat in its inventory, but you know, I'm fleshing it out a little bit. And on top of that, they can gather berries too, like the Stego, but they've just got so many other nice attributes that I really do have to put them in at this spot. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you will have enjoyed, as I definitely enjoyed making this one. As always, comment down below what is the best beginner Ark Tame for you, and if you didn't agree with this list, then put your 10 in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.